Since I'm the type of person who is very open in regards to watching various different types of anime, I've come across tons of series that have garnered numerous personal responses from me. Some acclaimed anime lived up to the hype, hidden gems were discovered, I dabbed in disappointment, I found select series to be either overrated or underrated, my mind was blown, my blood boiled, tears were shed, and I got my hands dirty when submerged in utter trash. With all the anime I've consumed, I've experienced my fair share of the good and bad. However, there were times where the line between the two became blurred, and thus results in what I would refer to as a guilty pleasure. This type of phrase is commonly thrown around, as I'm sure we've got those movies that are bad but we enjoy them anyway, or video games that aren't good but we can't help but play them regardless. I don't care what anyone says, I love Sonic R! And of course, anime is no different. As though I can determine for myself which anime I view to be overall bad, there may be an element or two that was done rather well, or particular aspects of the series that just so happened to resonate with me despite the generally poor quality that allowed me to obtain a fair amount of enjoyment, and there were 10 in particular that I couldn't help but smile at through gritted teeth. So join me everyone, as I sit back and indulge myself in stuff that clearly isn't good for me, as I count down my top 10 guilty pleasure anime. It goes without saying that this video is purely my opinion, as the idea of a bad anime is highly subjective. Therefore, if you feel these guilty pleasures aren't bad to begin with, that's great, I'm glad you're able to garner so much enjoyment from them. Alternatively, if you view them to be so bad that nothing of value can be gained from them, you're probably right. Also, I'd like to stress that the purpose of this video is not to try and convince anyone that these anime are good or worth watching, because honestly, they're probably not. They just so happen to make a connection with me, and I'm ranking these anime based on how much I enjoyed them in relation to how bad they are. Quick side note, I will not be featuring the anime High School of the Dead, High School DxD, Freezing and Sword Art Online on here since I feel like I've talked about them enough already. And with all that cleared up, it is with a heavy heart that I will now prove to the world that I have shit taste, because these anime are trash. And you know what? So am I. Gamers. As an individual who grew up playing video games and is the main topic of discussion on this channel, I'm glad the industry has blossomed into a much more mainstream market. But of course this comes with downsides, what with the shady business practices and very forced methods of implementation into other formats.
Pokemon go to the polls!
This notion of being forced is precisely where gamers comes in. As while I don't find the anime to be horrendous or even that bad to be honest, I personally wouldn't go far as to call the anime good, primarily due to how contrived the whole thing is. Ironically though, that's part of the anime's charm, which made it equally parts entertaining and cringeworthy to sit through. Ah, the beauty of equivalent exchange. At face value, Gamers is a rather harmless slice-of-life romance with a focus on video games. That in of itself isn't a bad premise, and for what it's worth, I think the series is otherwise fine to watch and doesn't do anything I deem awful. However, the problem lies in how the subject of video games and its various facets are integrated into the narrative. Instead of being clever or interesting with how each character feels concerning the format and have their personalities and ideologies bounce off each other in a comedic fashion, Gamers opts for using the most cliche of stereotypes and uncomfortably forces the subject of video games into their conversations that makes the entire thing feel very manufactured. And whenever the topic of conversation changes, the characters are so bland that the entire thing goes stale faster than playing through Birthright. Gamers also loves to base most if not all of its humour around misunderstandings, which I'll admit a few times got a laugh from me, but I quickly noticed how the anime would overuse this trope to an uncomfortable degree, and eventually I just got fed up and found myself groaning so much as if I was watching the 2016 Berserk series. I know I've been very negative towards Gamers, and it's mainly because its brand of comedy is not my cup of tea. But I do have to give the series credit, I think it looks nice and it can be genuinely funny. Not to mention, there are moments peppered here and there where the characters talk about their feelings concerning video games and how they've impacted on their lives, occasionally being rather heartfelt and moving. When all is said and done, though the majority of Gamers rubs me the wrong way, there's enough of the good stuff to keep it from getting a game over. Akashic Records. I find that one of the biggest strengths and weaknesses any intellectual property can have is when a single character carries the entire narrative, as the majority of the time that individual will be so good that they steal the show whenever they're featured. Conversely, however, if said character happens to not be the focus, everything tends to fall flat on its face. Just look at Lelouch, he makes Code Geass what it is, to the point where they would be stupid not to have him as the centre of the story. And look how well that turned out. This is the case with Akashic Records, as this dude right here is a true delight, but everything else about this anime is so blah that not even he can save it from being, in my opinion, very middle of the road, though it's nonetheless enjoyable despite the mediocrity. Akashic Records of Bastard Magic Instructor? God, what a mouthful. I view it to be a very typical magical high school anime. Just about everything explored here has been done before and better in other stories, and doesn't offer up anything new aside from highly questionable school uniforms. Like seriously, what the actual fuck? Now, I don't feel that just because an anime isn't original, that automatically makes it bad. Case in point, My Hero Academia. But my problem lies in that I found that there was literally nothing of substance here to get invested in. The magic system is boring, the world building is minimal and otherwise glanced over, most of the characters are so uninspired and cardboard they make the cast of SAO look like the Straw Hats. The animation and soundtrack are fine, but nothing spectacular. Plus, am I the only one who found many of the later scenarios in the story really out of place and just plain bizarre, but not in a good way? Because stuff like this just makes me go, huh? So yeah, Akashic Records is for the most part very mediocre. However, it does have one massive saving grace, that being the main character, Glenn Raiders. Oh my god, this man is a true blessing. Take everything you expect from a wise mentor figure and just throw it out the fucking window. Glenn is one of the laziest, cynical, leeching, deadbeat characters in anime and works such a brilliant contrast to everything else in the series. Whenever he's on screen, Glenn downright steals the show and makes this otherwise mundane magical institute a triad of mishaps and knee slaps. Plus, to the anime's credit, it does touch upon the ideology that one shouldn't stick to the foundations and try to experiment and think outside the box rather than just doing what they're told, which I appreciate. I guess the best way to sum this anime up is like biting into a bowl of Alpen, or Lucky Charms for another comparison. The majority of it tastes bland and unappealing, but those raisins / marshmallows are so good they make the entire ordeal worth it. And well, Glenn is a very tasty morsel. Asterix War. Playing it safe is quite the double-edged sword in any industry, as despite the smaller chance of the product turning out bad, there remains the strong possibility that said property won't be able to stand out or create its own identity either, especially in a long-running franchise. Ain't that right, Assassin's Creed sequels? Asterix War I view to be one of the worst case offenders, as each element this anime has going for it, I've seen been tackled previously and often in a far superior manner from different divisions. So if you're watching this series to witness something new or unique, you'll have better luck trying to convince me that Shadow the Hedgehog is a good game.
Damn!
While I will openly admit this anime is incredibly generic and not very inspired, for me it was generic in all the right ways, to the point where I ended up really enjoying my time despite my brain telling me there was so much better out there. I should learn to listen to it more often. Similarly to the preceding entry, Asterix War plays out like a very typical magical high school tournament anime and goes through all the motions of the subgenre to a T. If you've seen the irregular magical high school, there you go. This anime is otherwise shameless in how cliche it is, as literally after watching no less than 5 minutes, I was able to predict everything that was going to happen in the story, the characters' motivations and personalities, if you can call them that, how each match would turn out, you get the idea. Like I said before, just because something is unoriginal, that doesn't automatically make it bad. But Asterix War can be downright offensive in how by the numbers certain rudiments are utilised. I mean, don't get me started on how inconsistent and vague the magic system in this world works. Not to mention the random as hell plot elements that come out of nowhere and are forgotten just as quickly. Along with one of my most hated of all anime cliches, the Gary Stu super bland yet perfect everything chick magnet protagonist. Jesus Christ, I didn't think things could get worse than Kirito. Putting it simply, Asterix War is insipid and filled to the brim with cliches. But for what it's worth, most of them are cliches I really like. That's not to say it's free of bad ones. Oh no, there are plenty of terrible tropes present here. But I enjoy how the anime is structured and paced, and despite Gary's dude number who gives a fuck, the rest of the cast were pretty cool. I can't help but love the likes of Kieran, she's so cute. Saya is awesome on so many levels. Julius is one of the few tsunderes I actually like and the closest person to a character in this anime, so props to her. The animation is good despite the substandard art style. The fight scenes were pretty cool. It can be funny, dark, charming, and silly every now and then. I guess the best way I could describe Asterix War is essentially anime junk food. I find it fun to watch but didn't offer anything of substance. But hey, we all like to put rubbish in our bodies every now and then. Code Realize. If there's one genre that I perceive to get screwed over so much when being adapted into anime, it's visual novels, often being unable to follow each pathway or outcome and result in a clusterfuck of plot threads and character arcs that go nowhere. Fate Stay Night, I'm looking at you. Code Realize, among others, succumbs to this so much that it's downright painful, as the whole show is a jumble of plot lines and controversies with very over-the-top characters and unexplored themes. So objectively speaking, this anime isn't good. But fuck me, is it charming. Code Realize contains a style and aura that I absolutely adore, and despite noticing the continuous amount of errors and missteps, I couldn't help but be enjoyed by every second of the journey, to the point where I actually bought the game it's based off. Please be good. As someone who hadn't played the visual novel before viewing the anime adaptation, I can only judge Code Realize for what it is, which I would best describe as misguided. As with many adaptations of the sort, Code Realize tries to combine multiple story arcs into a single 13-episode narrative, and I don't think it works in the slightest. I mean, for what it's worth, the story of a woman that poisons whatever she touches who's been isolated all her life, wanting to be used by a third party as a weapon only to be rescued by Mr. Tuxedo Mask and lives on the run alongside a male harem, is not a bad premise at all, though the demographic for the series is made evidently clear. Once the dust settles, the foundations quickly begin to crumble, with characters being lucky to get so much as a single episode to flesh them out, plot points suddenly making a random appearance and being abandoned just as quickly, choices that raise several questions, and lots of themes and concepts that are no doubt interesting and frequently raised, only to then swiftly be forgotten. Why does this happen so often in anime? Unfortunately, having good ideas is not enough to save this series, and as a result, I find Code Realize to be a structural and narrative failure. However, I allowed all to be forgiven somewhat, thanks to being just so delightfully engaging. Right off the bat, I love the art direction for this series, sort of going for a steampunk-esque Victorian era vibe, which gives birth to a lot of cool designs. Plus, the characters have very distinct colour schemes and outfits to make them stand out and look unique. Speaking of which, though the cast might be very over the top, they have a sense of memorability and presence that regularly makes for charming interactions, and are essentially the glue that holds this mess together. Additionally, in spite of Code Realize failing to fully explore the themes it presents, they in and themselves are highly intriguing concepts that do warrant further investigation, so I'll at least give the anime props for addressing them. But by far, my favourite thing about this series is our leading lady, Cardia. Lord have mercy, I love Cardia. She's just so precious and angelic, my heart flutters whenever she's on screen. Plus, she's easily the most interesting and well-developed person in this story. Nothing amazing, mind you, but hey, I like her a lot. And though I ultimately don't feel this is a good anime, it never fails to put a smile on my face. Here's hoping the source material picks up the slack. Keijo. Anime has a reputation of kicking logic to the curb in favour of some of the most over-the-top, fist-pumping pieces of animation ever created. In fact, I think that studio triggers entire business practice. That being said, some anime are still able to deliver engaging stories and interesting characters despite the idiocy. Unfortunately, Keijo is not one of them, as it likes to insult my intelligence so much that I'm convinced I ended up losing more brain cells than attempting to understand who thought the second half of Sword Art Online was a good idea. Well, if I am going to subject myself to brain damage, at the very least, it'll be for the sake of embracing the most ridiculously entertaining, stupidly splendid sports action ever put to paper. Man, the lengths people would go to get their kicks. The basic premise of Keijo is that it's essentially a game of Ring Out. However, it is a female-only sport and they must attack using just their breasts and buttocks. Make of that what you will. From the premise alone, you should have a pretty solid idea of what you're getting yourself into, and if you start to think of the rationality of it for just a second, the entire thing just falls apart. As I profess the cast to be incredibly one-note, with a severe lack of a personal vibe or any semblance of character growth throughout. The logic is questionable at best. And simply put, nothing about this series makes any sense, and it's just used as an excuse to have women beat the shit out of each other using their assets. Give it time and Arc Systems will make this into a fighting game. It's pretty obvious by now, but by all forms of objective reasoning, Keijo is crap. But the testosterone-fueled part of my brain is telling me that Keijo is amazing. First and foremost, I am so glad Keijo goes for a far more humorous approach in regards to fan service, very much like Kill la Kill, where these girls' assets do some of the craziest shit that somehow leave minimal negative repercussions, and are drawn and composed in a way that makes the ordeal look much more silly than sexual, resulting in some insane acrobatics and out-of-this-world fights that is the most fun I've had watching anime in years. Keijo also has a very lively and lovable ensemble of gymnasts that I'll admit are not deep in the slightest, but have lots of colour to them. Additionally, Keijo hosts an overall good quality of animation in the fight scenes, and the music does an excellent job of getting the hype levels going. Just listen to this and tell me you're not feeling it. Didn't think so. Keijo, coherently speaking, isn't worth watching, yet the anime relishes in how stupid it is and doesn't try to be anything else aside from a senselessly fun, preposterous sports anime that's filled with TNA, and yet somehow manages to be tamer than the majority of modern day anime. This is why we're a failure as a species. The Quota of Stigma. You know how anime gets a bad rep because of the excessive amounts of fan service, especially when said fan service gets in the way of the storytelling? Well, you can blame anime like this for that. And also High School of the Dead. Just why? The best way I feel I can sum up the Quota of Stigma is that it is one part interesting anime with some cool concepts, likeable characters and unique action, and the other half is a trashy hentai without actually being a hentai. Man, it can't even get that right. Out of all the anime on this list, this one is probably the overall worst, but I can admire what it was trying to do, and the moments where it actually wanted to tell a story aren't too shabby. Credit given where credit is due, as they say. At face value, the anime seems harmless enough. Young whitehead boy with extreme angst fights off monsters and lives in his own harem. Typical anime fare. However, the catch is that the anime opts to switch between two juxtaposition tones frequently per episode. Sometimes the anime is story-driven, has a dark atmosphere, fleshes out its characters and builds towards something grand. And other times shit like this happens. Riveting. This is the biggest problem I have with the anime, as the tone is continuously fighting between these two extremes to the point where it feels like the anime is fighting amongst itself as to which direction it wants to go in, making for many jarring moments that kill the mood and atmosphere, or fail to leave an impact due to the constantly conflicting essence of the narrative. That alone is bad enough, but unfortunately it doesn't stop there, as certain details about the plot and the world make no sense, and there are a lot of scenarios that just make me shake my head and say, nah. As bad as this anime gets, and trust me, it gets bad, whenever its head is screwed on correctly, I actually rather enjoy it. The cast, while pretty basic, are all likeable and given time to grow throughout the journey. The animation isn't anything special, but the action scenes are often very creative, and I admire the atmosphere. The soundtrack is actually pretty good stuff, and being honest, some of the story elements I find rather fascinating that make for an intriguing watch, only to be ruined by shit like this. The Quota of Stigma, much like High School of the Dead, is an anime I'm kind of ashamed I watched. Yet, I still enjoyed it and would gladly sit through it again. No, not because of that! If the series just focused on the good stuff and cut out the bullshit, I think it would make for a solid high school action anime. But for what we got, it could have been much worse, and I'll happily acknowledge it as a guilty pleasure. Look, if the Transformers can make billions, I can like this just fine. Clockwork Planet. Too often do great ideas fall flat on their face due to poor execution. It happened with SAO, it happened with Other M, Fates is probably the best example I can think of, and Clockwork Planet is another tragedy of this trope. At face value, this series has a really cool premise that drew me in straight away, only to observe just how rusty its gears really were, but in spite of how poor the performance was, I couldn't bring myself to turn away thanks to all the little things about this anime I really admired, that while not saving it from being bad in my books, did make for a memorable experience I'm grateful I sat through, so clearly it's doing something right. The title essentially tells you everything you need to know, as it is set in the world where everything is constructed on the foundations of clockwork mechanisms, with the story centering around our main protagonist Naoto, who stumbles upon a rare automaton only he can fix, because you know, main character. Upon being rebooted, they meet up with another mechanic and her automaton and work together to stop the government's various illegal activities. Straight out of the gate, I was really digging this setup, and the show emanates an atmosphere that helps signify with a strong sense of identity. Plus, I admire the art style too, slightly chibi and more rounded, which I find very charming. On the subject of charming, that's something the cast has in spades, as I really like these characters and they worked off each other very well, and pretty much kept the gears going. Primarily because after the first 3 episodes, the series took a massive nosedive. While the story of Clockwork Planet started out simple enough and was easy to follow, as things progressed, it quickly began to make less and less sense, with plot threads and characters just popping into existence along with the narrative losing focus and unsure of where to go next, often making for poor pacing, and many moments where the series just likes to indulge itself and parade around its obvious merchandise. Honestly, have you no shame? The longer the series went on, the worse it became, unfortunately, as so many solutions to problems are pulled straight out of the anime's ass, and by the end it felt like I was watching an entirely different show, which is rather upsetting as I initially had high hopes for this series. I could easily see it being not necessarily a great anime, but a damn solid sci-fi adventure, and as sad as it is that the end result was less than stellar, I'm still glad I witnessed this clock's final chime. Rewrite. Yet another visual novel that was lost in translation. If you thought Code Realized suffered from the trappings most visual novels fall into when being adapted, Rewrite makes it look like Brotherhood levels of consistency to the source material, as the second half of this series was an entire storyline per episode, and before that, things moved at such a slow pace there wasn't much of a story to begin with. Time management people, look into it. I can easily claim the entire series to be a giant mess from a personal and objective point of view, but good lord does it know how to be amiable. The entire anime just oozes with colour and personality that made for one of the most mesmerising and erroneous shows I've ever watched that ironically took a turn for the worse by becoming more story focused and serious, and now I don't know what to believe. Rewrite is one of the most oddly constructed anime I've ever sat through. However, I'm purely judging it as an adaptation and will not make any comparisons to the source material, as at first it comes off as a slow-moving slice-of-life comedy series with a fantasy element to it, but by the second half it jumps from a war story, to Monster of the Week, to cold sci-fi every single episode. The premise of Rewrite focuses on our main character Tennoji living through various different timelines in order to prevent the end of the world. Therefore, by jumping through genres, settings, storylines and tone so frequently results in an utter mess that becomes far too convoluted and uneven, that by the time one episode has been able to deliver something of meaning, it's completely abandoned in favour of what else they can pull from the source material. Steins Gate this ain't, ladies and gentlemen. I understand that the team was trying to adapt as much of the visual novel as they could, but clearly there was not enough time to explore everything, and all the new characters that got introduced in the second half got shafted big time. So far, I've been reasonably adamant about how much Part 2 of Rewrite sucks, but that's primarily due to how much I enjoyed Part 1. The first 12 episodes of Rewrite is comprised of a single narrative, allowing it enough time to be fleshed out and told in a way that feels natural, helps greatly due to its cast which I love. The members of the Occult Research Society, though typical as far as characters go, are just so lovable in their cutesiness, and even get episodes dedicated to their backstories, making them feel more three-dimensional. Not to mention, I find Tennoji to be one of the better anime protagonists in this day and age, equal parts stupid and flawed, yet hilarious and noble at the same time. Thanks to all these individuals, along with an adorable art style that conjugates such warm, fuzzy colours, the first half of Rewrite I found to be very entertaining, that was able to make me smile and laugh. Plus, as bad as the second half was, it occasionally had some very emotional and powerful moments. Visual novel-based anime can never seem to catch a break. While overall I think Rewrite is very flawed, 50% of the journey is an experience I'll be happy to relive over and over again. Comet Lucifer. They say originality is dead in this day and age, and while it's mostly true given all the sequels, remakes and adaptations, there do exist original ideas and properties. The only problem being that just because something is original doesn't automatically make it good. Case in point, Comet Lucifer. This anime really upset me because I wanted to love it, and I mean really love it. Starting off on such a strong foot, harboring a sense of energy and vibrance not many anime come close to, but fuck me did it shit the bed in the long run, and I have no idea what it wanted to do by the end, alongside all the other issues dragging it down. Even so, I can never bring myself to hate this anime because of how much splendor it was able to deliver for a while. And hey, no matter how bad this anime got, I was able to reach the very end, which more than I can say for this lot. Comet Lucifer's state of affairs I noticed to be remarkably similar to that of Clockwork Planet, beginning the excursion on a very high note, being effervescent and filled with colour, having a cool art style and character designs, a captivating concept that set the groundwork for a great adventure, only for the narrative to get progressively worse the further it went along, and essentially just giving up in the end. Starting out, I felt this series showed a lot of promise. I found the characters likeable and vastly different from one another. The world and architecture I find to be highly endearing and home to a multitude of lovely looking locations. There's a dark element to the narrative lurking in the background to give it an extra layer of depth without overshadowing the overall upbeat nature of the story. I swear, these first few episodes got me so excited for the series, and it was beginning to remind me of the likes of Laputa Castle in the Sky, but the longer the anime went on, the quicker I began to realise that this kinda sucks. As the story proceeded, the more it began to fall apart, with characters moving from one location to another without really exploring it or help further the world building, potential for great arcs and character development being quickly thrown out the window, so many Deus Ex Machina moments I began to question why far too often, taking such a simple premise and attempting to turn it into a sci-fi epic that ended up going nowhere, and though this might be something that couldn't be helped due to production costs, I feel trying to tell a grand adventure story in 12 episodes really isn't enough time to go on, well, an adventure. At the end of the day, the previous list of complaints have resulted in Comet Lucifer garnering such a poor reputation, but to me the series was an overall fun ride and even managed to have quite the number of emotional set pieces every now and then, and I reckon if reworked and taken full advantage of, it may have had the potential to become a modern classic. Regalia, the Three Sacred Stars. I'm not going to be around the bush here. I think this anime is bad. Like, not kind of bad or just average, I mean it's bad. Where do I even begin? How about the absurd story, super straightforward characters, decisions and resolutions that defy all forms of logic, whatever passes for world building, you get the idea. Granted, it's not the worst anime out there, trust me, I've been down that road. And yet for some reason it's probably my favourite anime on this list. Why, you ask? Simple. It's a combination of my two favourite things in anime, giant mecha battles and super cute anime girls. That's all I need, and by God does this series deliver. Too bad so much of it is terrible. I have a hard time pinning down how I would describe Regalia the Three Sacred Stars, but ultimately it's a series that I feel only has things like a plot or backstory merely out of obligation. I say this because the story of Regalia is incredibly vague and half the anime fails to acknowledge the overarching narrative, instead preferring to let the characters indulge themselves in such whimsical activities, which I'll admit is absolutely adorable. When it does decide to get back on track, stuff just kinda happens. And though the history surrounding the story and some ideas are pretty cool, they don't really amount to much half the time. The characters except maybe Ingrid barely change or grow in the slightest, and when regarding how certain elements of this universe function, I'm convinced even it doesn't know what it's talking about half the time, as this series is far too busy having these precious little princesses parade around in giant robots all the time. And I fucking love it! I won't deny that the cast is primarily very shallow, but fuck me are they just so lovely and unbelievably enchanting, to the point where I could watch them mosey about their day-to-day lives and not complain in the slightest. Which is good because that makes up half a dozen episodes. Regalia has this almost euphoric feel to it that always puts me in a good mood, helped thanks to the very bright colours and chibi-esque art style aside from the mechs. Speaking of which, even though the robots in this series look super edgy, you'd swear Ryuko and Reaper would suit up in them, the actual fight scenes I thought were good. Like, really good. The movements and animation assigned to these mechs are so dynamic and fluid along with such intense speed that make for some really awesome fights that can get downright exhilarating sometimes. And with mecha being my favourite genre, this anime was just spoiling me. Without a doubt, Regalia the Freesaker Start is a defining example of style over substance, as I could tell that it clearly wants its characters to do cute things and have fun times with the occasional super robot slugfest, while everything else is an afterthought. I can't condone this to be a good anime, as all the basic elements for any kind of story are otherwise non-existent, and the reason I like it so much is largely personal, as it just so happens to appeal to my two biggest niches. But it's precisely for those reasons that I honestly love this anime so much, knowing full well that deep down I really shouldn't. And if it's able to get my approval despite doing so much wrong, then clearly I have really shit taste and am proud of it, which is why it takes the #1 spot as the anime that is my greatest guilty pleasure. This has been Blazing Knight. I wish you all a great night, take care, and though I tried to avoid bad anime as much as possible, sometimes I find myself bearing through the darkness until the light emerges. But between those thick clouds that envelops a bad anime, occasional sparks of light burst through the blackness and create what can only be described as a guilty pleasure. Thank you all for watching today. I hope you had a great time and enjoyed the video. Please let me know what you thought in the comments. I'd love to know what some of your guilty pleasure anime are. Don't worry, I won't judge you. We should all embrace the fact that these anime are trash. And please don't forget to give this video a like, subscribe and click that bell to stay notified, follow me on Twitter, Discord and Amino, and if you want to go the extra mile, please consider donating to my Patreon to help support the channel and receive some additional benefits. And before I bid you all farewell, I'd like to say a huge thank you to all my wonderful patrons who help support this channel and make these videos possible. Thank you, you people are the absolute best and I love you. And I'd like to give shoutouts to my very special patrons Nate Perkins, Chaos Saberlai, Karim Chowdhury, Justin Konovich, Vanessa Westfall, Vinton Clark, Midnight Castle, Batanko Fan 32, Maggie Fall, Almond, Jeremy Redinger, The Main Idea, Perfect Oblivion, and Feralin8392. You people are the absolute best. I love you. Anyway, that's it from me. I'll see you all next time.